Well, good morning and welcome to all of you. I'm Roy Williams. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber. And while I'm speaking, feel free to enjoy your salad. This is going to be a working lunch, so feel free to clank your silverware and enjoy your salad as we continue to introduce this subject we want to talk about and which we believe is extremely important at this time in our community. We organize these Friday forums for members who want to learn more about issues in our region, and we believe infrastructure is one of those. As all of you know, Oklahoma City sits at the crossroads of America with the interstate system that comes through our city. And infrastructure plays a very crucial role in our region's ability to continue to grow. So today we're going to hear a summary of the American Society of Civil Engineers Local Infrastructure Report Card, followed by a panel discussion on current transportation issues. And then finally we will hear from our keynote speaker, Mr. Ed Rendell, Building America's Future co-chair and the former governor of the state of Pennsylvania. But first, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the people and the companies who make these sessions possible. And today's series signature event sponsor is Cox Business. So Randy Chandler, right there, if you want to come to the podium and make some comments, it's yours.
Thank you, Roy. You know, Cox is very proud to be the presenting sponsor for today's Friday Forum. Cox believes in supporting the Chamber's mission of creating a pro-business climate, a climate that our local business can thrive by producing and distributing our goods and services for local and for global markets. Cox is very pleased to be a partner in the communications infrastructure for the city. This gives us insight into the importance of planning, implementing, and maintaining infrastructure. This infrastructure benefits all of our citizens and also, of course, the businesses. So we look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel about the future of transportation in order to help us better understand the strategic impact of transportation for our quality of life and our ability to conduct business effectively in the months and the years ahead. So on behalf of all of the employees at Cox, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Randy. We have two of our series corporate sponsors, too, that I want to point out. That is Central Liquor Company and Guernsey, so please help me thank them. At this time, I want to ask Dr. Jason Peak to come up. Jason is a seasoned professional in public works and infrastructure management and currently serves as the Transportation Department Director for the City of Stillwater. He also serves on the American Public Works Association Small Cities and Rural Communities Committee and is the Infrastructure Report Card Committee Chair for Oklahoma's section of American Society of Civil Engineers. He's a licensed professional engineer with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, master's degree in city and regional planning, and a doctorate in public administration. Jason?
Thank you all. As he said, I'm here representing the Oklahoma section of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Our membership in Oklahoma includes more than 850 members that are responsible for the design, operation, and maintenance of our state's infrastructure. Today I want to share with you a recent assessment of something that affects each and every citizen every day, whether they know it or not, our state's infrastructure. Now, while today's focus is on transportation, it's important to realize that all this infrastructure is an integrated system delivered both vertically at the local, state, and federal levels and operating across different systems such as transportation, water, and energy. These systems provide the physical framework for our economy and our standard of living. The performance of them is critical to our economic well-being and quality of life. The American Society of Civil Engineers has developed both national and state report cards to measure the performance of these infrastructure systems. To set the stage for today's discussion, I'd like to share a short video with you.
Infrastructure is the foundation that connects our nation's businesses, communities, and families, driving our economy and improving our quality of life.
Well, infrastructure is what binds our country together. It allows us to move goods and services around the country, allows us to flip a switch and have electricity, turn on a faucet, have water.
You can't run a 21st century economy on a 20th century foundation. You need a modern system.
Quality infrastructure is critical to economic development and economic growth, and it's important that a state has a plan of action, has timetables, has measurable results, puts the funding behind it to take care of their infrastructure.
If a city is not investing in itself, it's probably not going to be able to attract that next generation of people with choices.
The American Society of Civil Engineers 2013 Report Card for America's Infrastructure is a comprehensive assessment of current infrastructure conditions and needs across 16 categories.
It's a snapshot in time that says, how are we doing as a nation in maintaining and modernizing our infrastructure? We have a responsibility to let America know what's happening to this investment they've made.
The grades in 2013 ranged from a high of B- for solid waste to a low of D- for inland waterways and levees, resulting in a cumulative GPA of a D+.
Chicago Transit Authority is over 100 years old. Some of our elevated tracks date from the 1800s.
We have water mains in Washington, D.C. that were put into service before the Civil War, and we still have them functioning, and no wonder they break. But we've got an outdated system.
As far as the ports are concerned, there's certainly need for investment in the infrastructure on both the water side as well as on the land side.
About 42% of American roads are in poor condition, and it costs Americans about $101 billion a year in lost wages, wasted time.
We are behind. Between now and probably 2040 or 2050, we'll effectively be replacing the electric system. We are playing catch-up for a quarter century of not paying a lot of attention.
We've lost that instinct to have the best infrastructure projects, and I think we're going to suffer for it long term.
It's not only a challenge that Illinois faces, I think that's a challenge we face across the country. We are an aging, crumbling infrastructure.
We need leaders to step out and say, at the federal level, the state level, and the local level, we need them to step out and say infrastructure is important.
If our infrastructure doesn't work for us now, what about the future when we have more people?
Where investments have been made, we see the grades improve. From private investment allowing businesses to operate more efficiently, to cities and states creating long-term plans to fix their most vulnerable bridges. We see that where there is action, there are results. We saw 6 categories improve their grades over the last 4 years.
If you look at our rail system, local rail, the major rail lines have been making the investments in their trackage, in their bridges, and their facilities, and it's starting to show. The grades actually went up for rail.
We are making some progress. I think we have to recognize we're not going to reverse the trend overnight.
Every time we've gone back to our citizens and met or exceeded their expectations, they've allowed us to dream one more time.
The most important thing we can do for economic development is infrastructure investment.
It's just not the government that has a stake in infrastructure. It's every business, it's every community.
All right, so with that national perspective in mind, the Oklahoma section of ASC has developed the first comprehensive report card of Oklahoma's infrastructure. Our report card uses a traditional school grading scale of A through F, with A being excellent and F being failing. This report card looked at 8 infrastructure categories, and it also includes specific recommendations that we can do to improve our grades. Our grades range from a low of D- for our levee systems to a high of B for rail. A consistent weakness in our state's infrastructure is the investment needs for maintenance and upkeep of these existing systems. Overall, our state received a grade of D. When we looked at the condition, capacity, and mounting funding gaps, it was clear to see that our infrastructure needs improvement. While sustainable investment is a significant issue, we need to ask ourselves, Why is it so difficult to fund infrastructure? One significant factor is the public infrastructure business model. While private firms focus on investment, or return on investment, and shareholder value, our public models focused on cost and competing customer demands. This focus on cost in our public models creates a significant disconnect between the price we pay and the service of infrastructure that we receive. Let's take, for example, my trip down here from Stillwater this morning to Oklahoma City. I woke up, I took a shower. My shower consumed about 17 gallons of water. That only added a cost of about 10 cents to my monthly utility bill. Along the way, I stopped, bought a cup of coffee, $2.12. About 17 cents of that was sales tax to local state governments. And then my trip from Stillwater was 67 miles. So I consumed 67 miles of roadway. I crossed 8 major bridges and went through 15 signalized intersections. During that trip, my car only used 3 gallons of gas. At current prices, that's about $10.35 of gas in Stillwater, and that includes $1.06 in fuel tax. So upon arriving here to speak with you, my total out-of-pocket expenses were $12.57. $11.24 of that went to private businesses for private goods, and $1.33 went in taxes and fees for consumption of public goods. But unlike that coffee or gas that I bought this morning, it's hard to reconcile that $1.33 I spent on the roads, the bridges, and the water that I consumed in getting here today. And unfortunately for you folks here in Oklahoma City, I spent my money in Stillwater, so I've been using your infrastructure free of service, but I promise to spend some dollars locally before I leave today. My point of the story, though, is not to talk about that magnitude of difference in cost between the public goods and the private services, but more importantly, to focus on that lack of connection between our consumption of infrastructure and the consumption of private goods. The meager price that we pay for public infrastructure affords us the ability to consume a lot with little connection to the cost of service. And it's this connection problem that makes it difficult for our elected officials and decision makers to provide the necessary resources to maintain and operate our infrastructure while competing with other public demands, such as public safety. So how do we overcome this problem? Well, I suggest it's better communication and prioritization when it comes to infrastructure. And fortunately, the state of Oklahoma has a couple of examples to demonstrate how communication and prioritization of infrastructure can start to improve our grades. Many of you know in this room that Oklahoma has a bridge problem. As you know, we rank high among other states around the country in the number of structurally deficient bridges per county. This map on the screens before you, the yellow color indicates the higher concentration of structurally deficient bridges, and you can see we have a lot here in Oklahoma. Fortunately, the governor's bridge program, along with the support of our elected officials and the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, will make significant improvement to our state's bridges, with a goal of replacing all these structurally deficient bridges by 2019. Well, now that we've talked about national and state, we come to the local level, and it's our local governments that provide most of the public infrastructure that we consume on a daily basis. And you folks in Oklahoma City have done an excellent job in communicating infrastructure needs through your successful MAPS program. This construction program, focused on improving infrastructure and the quality of life for Oklahoma City, has done an excellent job of connecting the penny spent with projects that impact your citizens. This MAPS program has helped stakeholders focus on that return on investment and better understand that price of infrastructure. Both the MAPS and the Bridge program demonstrate that focus and attention on infrastructure issues will lead to better performance. Now, as business leaders in Oklahoma, you know the importance of having good infrastructure. Our roads, transit, rail, aviation, and ports are needed to move goods and services. Safe, efficient, and reliable infrastructure systems are critical to support and sustain economic growth. Improvement in these grades on our screen is not solely a resource issue, but an issue of priorities. The previous success stories I mentioned occurred because our communities and decision makers made a choice to prioritize infrastructure among other competing public demands. On your table are copies of the 2013 report card with more detailed information about the grades and the recommendation from ASCE. These recommendations can move our state forward in each area of infrastructure. We hope you use the report card as a call to action to make infrastructure a priority in your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists for today, and as I call your name, please join me on the stage as I introduce you. The world is taking notice of Oklahoma City's remarkable renaissance, as was partially pointed out there, and its popular mayor, Mick Cornett. His growing list of individual awards and honors include nods for urban design, health, sports, the arts, etc. Newsweek named him one of the 5 most innovative mayors in the United States, and Governing Magazine named him the Public Official of the Year. And a London-based organization which studies mayors and their work listed him as the 2nd best mayor in the world, second only to the mayor of Mexico City. Mayor Cornett has been a champion for infrastructure and health. Oklahoma City is rebuilding its streets, its schools, and its parks. In 2009, he led the charge to pass MAPS 3, a $777 million capital campaign that includes a 70-acre downtown park, a modern streetcar system, senior wellness centers, river improvements, sidewalks and jogging trails, and other infrastructure projects that will dramatically reshape Oklahoma City and enhance the quality of life we all want to lead. So please welcome the mayor of Oklahoma City, Mick Cornett. Mayor. Our next speaker is Representative Charlie Joyner. First elected in 2006, Representative Joyner is completing his 3rd term as the 95th District Oklahoma House Representative. He works to improve public safety through better roads and bridges, serving as the chairman of the Oklahoma House of Representatives Transportation Committee, and is serving on the Energy and Aerospace and General Government Committees. Representative Joyner was elected to Midwest City Council in 2000, was re-elected to a 2nd term in 2004. He sits on the board of directors of the Midwest City Credit Union and served 22 years with the Midwest City Fire Department. Welcome, Representative Joyner. Our next panelist is Mike Patterson, who was appointed by the Executive Director of Oklahoma Department of Transportation in April 2013. Prior to that appointment, he served as the Deputy Director for the agency for 3 years, as well as filling the role of Chief Financial Officer since September 1999. Mike served as the board member for the Oklahoma Employees Credit Union for 28 years. He's been active with the American Association of State Highways and Transportation Officials for many years and is the vice chairman of the Standing Committee of Finance and Administration. Mike has 2 degrees from the University of Central Oklahoma, a bachelor's in accounting, and an MBA in finance. Mike, welcome to the stage. Our last panelist is Doug Rex, who currently serves as the director for the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, ACOG as we know it, Transportation and Planning Services Division. He previously served as the program coordinator. As division director, Doug is responsible for the leadership, coordination, development, and administration of transportation and community development issues that impact our region. He's a board member of the Oklahoma Urban Land Institute District Council and has served as an adjunct professor of transportation planning at the University of Oklahoma's Regional and City Planning Department. Doug has his bachelor's degree in political science from Memorial University of Newfoundland and his master's degree in urban planning from the University of Kansas. Doug, welcome to the panel. To the panelists, just a reminder we have a limited amount of time, so try to be brief in your responses to the questions I'm going to ask you. So we will kind of do this a little bit randomly. And Mayor, I'll start with you and have every panelist respond, and I have a number of questions until I'm told to move on. Okay. In a Washington characterized by partisan gridlock, innovative policy emanating from the state and local levels could provide the most fertile grounds for national solutions to that gridlock. Based on Oklahoma's experience, what message would you like to share with the President and Congress to promote making investing in infrastructure a top national priority? And then how optimistic are you that Congress will pass a multi-year transportation bill when the current MAP 21 expires in September 2014? Two-part question.
Okay, I'll take the last part first because I can still remember it.
And I can read the first one.
And that, well, I think ultimately they'll pass something because they don't really have a whole lot of choice. I mean, you've got to pass some funding, even if it, those of us in this room would probably agree it's not nearly enough or nearly as much as it should. As for Oklahoma City's experience, I think it's clear that there's going to be less money coming out of Washington, and I think one of the repercussions of that is that you're going to have communities around the country of haves and have-nots. In other words, those local communities that are more able to fund their infrastructure needs or their quality of life amenities are going to supersede and surpass those communities that can't figure out a way to fund their own local needs. I think the federal funding that we've relied on for hundreds of years has provided some sort of leveling out effect for American cities. And I think we're going to go into a system where some cities and some states are going to succeed at the expense of others when it comes to attracting talent. That's why I think Oklahoma City is set up to succeed, because there is political capital in our state and our citizens have been somewhat willing to pass infrastructure investments. And it concerns me for America, but if it's a competition that we're facing, I think Oklahoma City is probably poised to do pretty well.
Representative Joyner?
Well, I agree with the mayor. It's a situation of educating the public, because they're the ones that's going to call their legislators in Congress and make sure that money is available for the infrastructure. Oklahoma's doing great, and certainly I think we can do better, but just continue to keep the phone ringing at Congress.
Thank you. Mike?
I think one of the things we've learned in Oklahoma is the fact that, as Representative Joyner pointed out, calling and making contact with your congressional delegation, as the public has done here in Oklahoma with the state legislature, and insisting that something be done, and making transportation, in this case, a priority, and infrastructure a priority. As the mayor spoke about MAP 21 and what will the next authorization look like, I don't know that it's going to be another 6-year bill. The MAP 21 bill is a 2-year bill. We're used to having 6-year authorizations for federal funding, and I don't know that we're ever going to get back to that. But one of the things that came out of MAP 21 was not additional funding, and quite frankly, in the future going forward, we're probably going to be looking at reduced funding. But in MAP 21, we had significant changes to such things as environmental restrictions that hopefully when those things get into play, those are going to be worth lots of money to us, just simply in allowing us to do projects faster, more economical, and have less intrusion on the public as we go through our project process.
All right. Doug?
Well, look, I mean, we all know how important infrastructure is. This is evident, obviously, by the turnout we have here today, and Lord knows we all drove on it to get here today, so that means something. As far as the next transportation bill, they will pass something sooner or later. It took them 3-4 years through I don't know how many continuing resolutions before we got there, but I don't mean to be flippant with this, but it really doesn't matter unless we can come up with a sustainable funding source. The CBO just came out with a report in early part of April that suggested that in order to meet our 2015 obligations, we would have to do one of two things, and that's either cut the program by 92% or raise the fuel tax by 50%. And I don't think there's much of an appetite to do either one of those. So, I mean, there has to be a serious discussion about how we're going to fund our transportation needs. And I think this gets back to a critical point that the mayor made with regards to some regions are going to do well and others are not, because the reliance on federal transportation funding is not going to be what it used to be. It's going to rely a lot more on the will of regions to want to advance. So I think we're in pretty good shape.
Thanks, Doug. Second question I would ask each of you to comment on. Oklahoma City is just about completed, or rather the Department of Transportation is just about completed the I-40 Crosstown, about an $800 million infrastructure project. And so what I would ask each of you to comment on what you believe the significance of a project like this means, not only to our local economic development, but also to our national economic competitiveness, and what needs to be done by our elected officials to encourage more projects like this. Representative Joyner.
What we have to do is realize that the crosstown started out with, had 75,000 cars a day. It winds up, it had over 100,000. And what has transpired since they built the new crosstown, it has opened up avenues to the north and the south, whereas before you just travel down the interstate, you just go right by Oklahoma City and said, why should we stop? And another thing is the crosstown has given so much to the counties to help their bridge building, but it's programs like that is not only cost effective, but it's beneficial to lots of counties in the state.
Thank you. Mike?
I think starting off, one of the things that occurs to us at ODOT relative to the crosstown is the fact that we got rid of a very large structurally deficient bridge. We got that bridge off the system, which was a major concern for us. It was one that, while we inspect most bridges every other year, some bridges once a year, and we inspected it once a day just to make sure that it was still in working condition. And it was when we took it out of service and took it apart. For what Representative Joyner pointed out, that we deconstructed the bridge so that we could donate many of the bridge beams, more than 2,000 of them, to the counties so that they could go about the effort of eliminating their structurally deficient bridges. From an economic perspective, it is I-40 is one of two east-west interstates that are in warm weather that you can use all times of the year. So from an economic perspective, keeping that open, keeping it viable as it is today, it was a very important factor in keeping commerce operating across the country.
Thank you, Mike. Doug?
Well, I think it shows that we still can do big things. And, the city and ODOT, they should be commended for, putting those pieces together to get this project done. And it was a huge undertaking, as everybody knows. But, I would like to speak to just real quickly about, major transportation projects and economic development. Too often in this transportation field, we're worried so much about congestion and, improving the level of service, when I think really is really a proxy for what we're really trying to get at is improving accessibility for people within the region. And, and they're not exactly the same. I mean, you ask someone who doesn't have a car if there's a difference between, level of service and accessibility, and there is. It's accessibility to jobs and other trip purposes. So as a result of that, I mean, I think that there are, driving patterns are also changing as well. We have an aging population. You know, we have 35 million senior citizens in this country right now, which is expected to double by the year 2030. We also have young professionals who, you know, their VMT or their vehicle miles traveled have been reduced. It's been reduced by 10% over the last 10 years. So driving patterns are changing. People, how they get from one place to another are not the same as what they were when we were growing up. You know, young professionals, they like living in urban cores. They don't have that ideal of living in the suburbs that we probably do. So I speak to all that just to suggest that I think we have to begin to looking at, in this region, about diversifying our transportation portfolio. We have to look at other modes of transportation as well. And, you know, we're doing that through our regional transit dialogue process that actually Mayor Mick Cornett is chairing and looking at. And I would argue that, you know, our economic competitiveness, we're operating at an economic disadvantage by not being able to offer that world-class transportation system. We have a world-class street and highway network, but we certainly, when you look at our competitors, regional competitors, the Dallases, the Denvers of the world, you know, we do not offer the same options to employees and the ability to attract business and employees that others do. I know I'm stirring the pot here, and hopefully it'll stimulate some discussion, but I think it's something that we need to throw out there, because if we want to really become what we say we want to become, we have to be able to be open to those dialogues and discussion and talk about having a full-blown transportation system.
Stirring the pot is good. Brevity's better. Mayor Cornett.
You know, I think that the crosstown improvement is a good example of what the general public doesn't like about these projects. It took too long and it cost too much. And we can point fingers at each other about they could have built it faster if the money had been there, and because it took longer, the price kept escalating. But at the end of the day, you know, other industries seem to have breakthrough technologies that lower the cost of production and lower the cost of design. And I don't see that in transportation type issues. There just seems this ever escalating cost and this assumption that elected officials and taxpayers have to figure out a way to pay for it. I suspect that there's just not enough money being put into R&D. And perhaps that's a responsibility of the federal government to try and figure out how we can keep these costs from escalating beyond what the taxpayer is willing to fund. Because right now, we just seem to be escalating out of control, and I believe the roads and bridges and transportation entities we're building are safer and stronger than ever before. But I keep waiting for this monumental day when someone says, I can do it for half that. And that day doesn't ever seem to be coming.
I think you've thrown down a challenge. Thank you, Mayor. This is perfect timing, Mike, for you to address this question. This is right up your alley. Under Governor Fallon's leadership, the state of Oklahoma has embarked, and this has already been said, upon an extremely ambitious plan to eliminate the state's structurally deficient bridges by 2019. So from each of your vantage points, what does it mean for the state of Oklahoma to be able to address its structurally deficient bridges, and what lessons could others learn from what Oklahoma's experience is? Mike?
Well, clearly one of the things that you get out of eliminating the structurally deficient bridges under the governor's plan is safety. You know, there's confidence by the traveling public that they're going to be able to get across a bridge and everything's going to be good, and that's good. But there's also the aspect of commerce. At one time, at the height of our structurally deficient bridge problem, back when we had 1,168 of our 6,812 bridges were structurally deficient, we had wheat farmers who couldn't get their crops to the elevators because they couldn't find a bridge that they could get across. I recall one day learning that some of the folks up in Garfield County had to go to Kansas to get to the Port of Catoosa because there wasn't a good route for them to get their commerce to the port. So the lessons to be learned is something I spoke about earlier and Representative Joyner touched on, is once a community, once a state, and if a nation would determined that transportation is in fact a priority, I think things would change. And in Oklahoma, under the leadership of the legislature, back in 2005, they began to fund the agency with an ever-increasing amount of state funds. That's when we began to realize some of the significant changes that we have enjoyed in the last few years and will continue to do and take care of the structurally deficient bridge problem. The state of Texas has been a long-standing best bridges in the country for a number of years, and I have taken up the mantra, much like the governor has, that we're coming after the state of Texas. We want to be number one rather than them, and I hope we're able to do that. If not, we'll be in the top 5, and that will be significantly different than the bottom 5.
Thank you. Doug?
Well, I mean, it shows laser focus, doesn't it, Mike? I mean, that's what it does. It shows that the state understands that we need to make this type of investment for business investment. And I think that's what it illustrates more than anything. And I think we'd be remiss, quite honestly, whenever this topic comes up, to recognize Secretary Ridley and the work that he did in 2005 in raising this issue, and quite frankly, having the bullheadedness to see it through to where we are today. He did tremendous work, and we certainly appreciate your efforts in that. So that's all I'll probably say.
Thank you. Mayor?
Let me ask a question I think I know the answer to. Don't we have the lowest road taxes of all the surrounding states that touch us? How do we compare with all the states that touch us? It's the lowest. So we underfund, if the comparative basis is our region, we underfund. And so, you know, if the general public is suspicious that our roads aren't as good as state X or state Y, there's probably an identifiable reason. I don't think that has been fully communicated to the public. I think there's this perception that our taxes are about like everybody else's, or maybe even higher than everybody else's, when in fact they are lower in that area. And I don't think they necessarily make the connection between those gas taxes and the quality of the roads that they're driving on. Because I think if they did, it would ease some of the discomfort that we seem to have about funding these things.
Excellent point. Representative Joyner?
What has been the issue with roads and bridges are the trucks that are overloaded, and now there is 2 port of entry stations, and they can inspect the truck, weigh it, and certainly issue citations. But until we get up to 11 port of entries, it's going to have to depend on DPS to monitor these places that the overloaded trucks bypass any scales. So when this comes to being, it will be an issue, a monetary issue, with the fines to help repair what the large trucks, overloaded trucks have done.
Thank you. The next question, and Doug, you can start this one off. All of you come with different perspectives, and from that perspective, answer this question. What can other local, state, and national leaders learn from what has occurred here in Oklahoma City in terms of the MAPS program? Not only the direct expenditure of billions of dollars by the public sector, but the other billions of dollars that have followed that from the private sector. So what would you tell other local, state, and national leaders that they could learn from that?
Well, based on a number of cities that have lined up to take tours of this place since MAPS, I think the word is already out for sure. But, you know, again, I said this earlier, but I think the public likes to do big things. And the problem, I think, what has been in the past is that they weren't too trusting of government to do it. And I think that's why the original MAPS was so important to this region, and really, quite frankly, regions around the country, that they can use us as an example. What it did, it built back that trust between City Hall and the constituency, and that's something that was lacking for several years. You know, there wasn't a lot of movement, in most large cities, and I think this has really helped. As far as the lesson for other cities, I might just say simply that I think it's important that we follow through in a transparent manner. that we do what we say we're going to do and do it and allow that to have input into the process. And I think as a result of that, we'll reap rewards. And that has been proven time and time again through MAPS 2, MAPS 3, and hopefully beyond. And it's a very good time to be living here in Central Oklahoma, no doubt.
Mayor? I think two big picture perspectives. One, that we recognized that the secret to economic development was the quality of life of the community. And secondly, that the business community took ownership over the quality of life, city government, and our school system, and worked in partnership with elected officials to try and accomplish great things. In most cities that struggle to emulate what Oklahoma City has done, there's typically a disconnect between City Hall and the business community. And in this community, there's a closer connection. And if there's one thing that's different, we have more people pulling on the same rope than other communities do.
What impresses me is the MAPS program that the mayor has been such a big part. In Midwest City, we had a tornado come through in '99, did a lot of damage, but we took the old part of Midwest City and just cleared it all out, and now we have a thriving community. If this had not have happened, we would, in Midwest City, they would have to lay people off. But as it is, it's just help enhance the city even more now.
Mike?
Something the mayor talked about is the closeness of the city with the business community. We've enjoyed similar kind of situation with the Department of Transportation. There have been certain projects that the business community has come forward and offered financial assistance to us to help accelerate those projects, because I think the business community sees the value in both working, as the mayor said, here in Oklahoma City with the MAPS program, but also on some regional transportation issues that have been beneficial to all of us.
Thank you. We're going to have a couple minutes for questions. I'm going to ask one more question to the panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to all of you for any questions that you might have for a few minutes. So be thinking about that as we go to the next question. And Mayor, we come back to you. You heard the report earlier about Oklahoma being given a grade of D overall on our infrastructure. What, from your perspective specifically, is Oklahoma doing or should be doing, and will it be enough to bring that grade up?
Well, first of all, I don't know that the rating system itself is helpful. People are usually inspired to do things when they feel good about something, and if they feel like they live in a state of failure, that's not necessarily a good way to get them to go to the polls and vote yes. It'd have to be a really big calamity for them to realize there's an emergency situation in progress. But the bottom line, despite that psychological edge, if we don't change the level of funding and there's no breakthrough in technology, we're going to get what we've always got. The reality is that our taxes are low in the state of Oklahoma and in Oklahoma City. A lot of people that live in the city and live in the state don't necessarily want to agree with that, but they are. And I think it's fair to say that the level of transportation infrastructure that we have is reflective of the money that we've prioritized for it. And until people decide that they're willing to invest more money, I suspect it's not going to get better measurably.
Representative Joyner?
In 2009, I believe I authored a bill to create the Oklahoma Transit Authority, which would allow the cities to tax themselves whatever was agreed to for Oklahoma City, Dale City, Midwest City, and Tinker. They would have to vote, all the entities would have to vote on this to tax the cities to do this, but this is one way that we could help the infrastructure as far as less traffic and more using the transit.
Thank you. Mike?
The grade that we see and the grade that we've received didn't come upon us overnight. It took us several decades to get in this situation. It's going to take a long time to get out of this situation. The state legislature, as I mentioned earlier, provided the department with additional funding. They found a different source to fund transportation over and above the motor fuel tax, which, as the mayor indicated and is correct, it is the lowest in the region. But they found an alternative source to provide us additional funding. As I said, it's going to take us a long time to get out of this situation. And you can see that in our 8-year construction work plan. We're working through the structurally deficient bridges. Our next big effort will be replacing pavements on U.S. highways, state highways, and the interstate, providing additional safety improvements along those routes, shoulders on narrow 2-lane highways. But it's a situation that we're not going to be able to provide immediate gratification, but we will provide meaningful gratification. But it is going to take a while to get it done.
Yeah, the grade is it's a real dose of reality, and I think it's shown the urgency that the legislature as well as local communities have shown towards maintenance. And quite frankly, it was forsaken for a long time because it's not as sexy as adding lanes, opening new roadways, and that type of thing. Everybody likes to go to ribbon cuttings for those types of things. Now, to the extent that even projects that we see come across our desks, I would say 85% of the projects now are maintenance related, whereas before, in my early years, there was probably 50-50. So I think that shows, that laser focus again on the need for maintenance and how important it actually is.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, it's the audience's turn. We have staff that has microphones, so if you have a question you want to direct to the panel or to one of the panelists, you can certainly direct it straight to an individual. So anybody got a burning question out there? We got one over here.
With improving gas mileages and alternative fuels that some of them, frankly, avoid road tax, how will the state compensate for that loss of revenue out of those situations?
Yeah, they're not. You bring up a great point that we hadn't brought up, but you can't compensate for that, and it would be nice if it were tied to a fit dollar amount like most taxes instead of per gallon. But it is what it is, and those things are difficult to change. But
I have to agree with the mayor.
This is something we've talked about for a number of years. The discussion's been ongoing for the last 30 years. What are we going to do as different alternative fuels? Back then it was if they showed up, and well, they're here now. We haven't seen a measurable reduction in consumption of fuel related to other types of vehicles such as CNG or electric vehicles. We do see some fluctuations periodically based on the price of gasoline. As gasoline goes up, some people will drive less. They won't go to grandma's house for Christmas because it's $4 a gallon. But everyone's tolerance is different for that. It might take me to get to $5 a gallon before I don't go. So, but we haven't seen much of a change. It's fairly constant. But the day's going to come when that's going to drop off. The fact that we tax it at a per gallon rate rather than a sales tax like some states do. Some years ago, the price of gasoline went up nationwide, and I think it went up to $4 a gallon. And the state of Georgia said, we're just going to suspend our motor fuel tax. Well, they didn't suspend the sales tax on motor fuel. They suspended the motor fuel taxes, which is one of the lowest in the country. So it was kind of a sexy thing to do, but it really didn't make much of an impact on the revenues. They still brought it in. So we've discussed over the years putting a sales tax or putting a sales tax in lieu of the per gallon tax. So it's an ongoing discussion. Don't know yet what will be the thing to do. I have my, if my druthers were there, it'd be a sales tax way to collect.
Okay. Questions? Yep.
Hi. Several of you had mentioned that to implement a lot of these changes, you're going to have to change public perception, and because they are so stuck in their old ways. What steps have any of you taken, or do you know of, that are being taken to move us forward and to maybe make those little digs to chip away at the old guard?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and you know, we're going through this regional transit dialogue process, which we're trying to elevate the discussion about. You know, if we really do want to have a regional public transportation system, as other major metropolitan areas do of our size, how would it be governed? How would we pay for it? You know, those types of questions, as a region, we've never really addressed. And so we're trying to do that. And part of that campaign, if you want to call it that, is a huge public outreach effort. We're in the process now of doing a commuter corridor study, which will look at commuter rail in 3 corridors in central Oklahoma. And there's a huge, very comprehensive public involvement process as part of that. It's not easy. I mean, we're not operating a speedboat here. It's the QE2 that we're behind the wheel of, and it's very difficult to turn that sucker around. And you know, when you've gone through generations of a certain culture being, you know, automobile based, it's very difficult to turn that around. And I think, you know, the younger generation is probably going to do that for us, and those are the ones that, you know, we're seen to be getting most of the calls from, and so we'll see how it goes. But we want to have that discussion. If that's not a direction this region wants to go, then so be it. But no one can say we didn't have the discussion.
More than a decade ago, Secretary Ridley came into a staff meeting one day and said, we're going to do some public outreach. I won't give you all the words that went with that, but that's essentially what he said. We're going to do some public outreach. And so we set about the task of sitting down with civic organizations all over the state. I can't tell you how many times we've been to the Altus Kiwanis Club, you know, and others all across this state. Those first meetings were provided a great deal of information to the taxpayers, because when we went to those meetings, we took charts and graphs and pictures, and they were pictures of bridges. It wasn't the top of the bridge we showed them. It was the bottom of the bridge. It was the part of the bridge that they had never seen before, and they didn't ever want to see that again. That's what changed it for ODOT. Once we began to, as they say, the truth will set you free. Once we began to show people what truly was just outside of their city limits in terms of their infrastructure, that's when they began to get engaged about what this thing needed to look like.
On the sales tax issue, it's getting everyone involved, because we can't raise the sales tax in the legislature, but we can put a fee on it. We just feed everything to death, and we've got to engage the public more where they would accept that extra money.
Mayor?
Well, I think what we're talking about here, though, is identifying the problem. You know, it's the solution side that's the real key. There are some, you know, creative funding models out there. None of them are fun, and the public's typically suspicious of anything that that, you know, that appears to be, you know, creative if it's on the taxation or funding side. But I don't even think the general public realizes that the day of the so-called, you know, free, untold new roads are over. I mean, I think they still think that the model that has existed since, you know, the first roads were built in this country still exists, and it's gone. It's gone in every state around the country. So there are certainly communication things that have not penetrated fully, but I think we ought to concentrate on the solution side, even if that means funding and takes a little bit more courage of elected officials, as opposed to the problem side, because identifying the problems are not difficult or hard.
Thanks to all of you and the panelists. We're right on time, so we're going to move on. Help me thank the panelists for their time. We're going to serve lunch now. Please enjoy that, and I'll be back up here probably in about 15 minutes for the last part of the program. Thank you. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker. After 34 years of public service, former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell has remained very heavily involved in the campaign for government efficiency and strategic cost-cutting through his work with entities such as Government Sourcing Solutions, Public Financial Management, and Green Hill Advisors. Governor Rendell currently serves as co-chair for Building America's Future. The organization focuses on the need for more significant investment in American infrastructure projects to ensure that America maintains its place in a global economic power. He served 2 terms as governor of Pennsylvania from 2003 to 2011. Through his unprecedented strategic investments, he energized Pennsylvania's economy, he revitalized communities, improved education, protected the environment, expanded access to health care to all children, and made affordable prescription drugs available to elder Pennsylvanians. He currently sits on a number of boards. He's a Brookings Fellow and teaches government and political courses at the University of Pennsylvania. Governor Rendell recently finished his autobiography, A Nation of Wusses. Maybe we'll hear more about that. An Army veteran, he holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania and a JD from Villanova Law School. Please welcome Governor Ed Rendell. Governor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to tell you just a tiny bit about Building America's Future. In 2008, myself, Mayor Bloomberg of New York, and Governor Schwarzenegger of California were talking at a meeting and decided we needed to do something to change what was happening in this country about infrastructure. Infrastructure, as one of the panelists said, is often described as the least sexiest word in the English language. And infrastructure funding always got put in the back burner. This country had stopped investing in its infrastructure. And we were seeing the seeds of that all over. Public safety, bridges crumbling, quality of life, Americans stuck in congestion, economic competitiveness, America falling farther and farther behind its global competitors because we don't move goods quickly and efficiently anymore. So we decided to do something about it. We founded an organization called Building America's Future, and the 3 of us were co-chairs. Governor Schwarzenegger had passed a $32 billion infrastructure referendum in California. Mayor Bloomberg had probably spent more money on New York City's infrastructure, not all of it his, than the last 5 mayors put together. And I was a big spender on infrastructure as governor. Governor Schwarzenegger's most valuable contribution, because he got tied up in a lot of fiscal problems in California. But the day we announced the formation of the group, he spoke and said the night before, his son had asked him, "Daddy, what's infrastructure?" Good question. A lot of Americans would ask the same thing. And Arnold said he told his son it's what daddy blows up in the movies. Pretty good answer. Pretty good answer. Well, if I were to tell you that I had an idea that could dramatically enhance our public safety, that could significantly improve our quality of life, that could rebuild America's economic competitiveness and shorten the edge that China and many emerging nations have had on us in the last few years, and create over 4.5 million new jobs, well-paying jobs that couldn't be outsourced. That would sound pretty good, right? Well, that's what a 10-year revitalization program of the American infrastructure would do. Spending $200 billion additional dollars a year, a mixture of federal, state, local, and private, would do exactly that. The United States Department of Transportation says $1 billion of infrastructure spending produces 25,000 jobs. 10 years at that level, $200 billion more, would produce 4.5 million jobs that would stay for a 10-year period. It would have a dramatic effect on America's future. And yet, there seems to be very little support for that idea, very little support. I want to give you an example of what we're sort of up against. Notwithstanding, the facts are unbelievable. The World Economic Forum ranked the American infrastructure in 2003 the best in the world. Last year, we were 14th best. Our air transport system, 32nd best in the world behind countries like Panama and Malaysia. Our ports, 19th best in the world behind Estonia and Latvia and Iceland. Our rail, 22nd best in the world. Of the top 10 ports in the world in terms of throughput, how many do you think are American? Anybody take a guess? I'll give you 2 tickets to the next Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl game. 0. How many do you think are Chinese? Someone said 6? 6. And Brazil is building a port that's bigger than the island of Manhattan because they know the importance of being able to move goods in and out quickly. They know the importance in the global marketplace. But we're going nowhere. Why? Let me give you an example. I was on the George Stephanopoulos Sunday show my last year as governor, 2010, and they showed me a tape, and it was of a congressman by the name of Mike Pence, who now is governor of Indiana. He was the ranking member of the House Budget Committee. He was talking at the CCAP convention, that conservative convention in Washington, and he was pounding the podium. He said, yes, we're the party of no. We say no to borrowing. We say no to spending. We say no to taxes. The clip ended, and Stephanopoulos asked me, Governor, what do you think of that? I said, it's a prescription for economic disaster for this country. I said, George, show me one company in this country that's grown successful without investing in its own growth, and we have to do the same. Well, Fox TV, not one to shy away from controversy, invited Congressman Pence and I on the following Sunday. Congressman Pence spoke first, and same riff. The moderator turned to me and said, Governor, and I turned to the congressman and I said, Congressman, you seem like a reasonable man to me. Well, in truth, he didn't, but I've done enough TV to understand that you want to be the good guy. So I said, Congressman, you seem like a reasonable man to me. Tell our viewers, how are we going to maintain safely our bridges, our roads, our dams, and our levees if we don't invest in maintaining them? There was about that length of silence, and on TV, that's eons of time. Congressman Pence, who's a very smart man, was struggling to come up with an answer. And finally, the best he did was, well, there you Democrats go again, using the word invest when you really mean spend. Well, no, Congressman, there's a huge difference between spending and investing. When we invest in infrastructure, we get something for it. It's tangible. We can see it. We drive on it. We ride on it. It improves our lives. We've got to get back to understanding that. We've got to get back and understanding that. I thought the panel discussion was great, and I think what you've done here is terrific. You know, what the mayor has done in Oklahoma City is incredible. He's convinced the voters that we need to invest in our own growth to become a stronger economy and a better place to live. And I was reading an interview that the mayor had with a street blog, and he said, we passed them all. He said, even though there's an active anti-tax environment in Oklahoma City, we passed them all. Yeah, because people are smarter than politicians. They understand that you get what you pay for. And we've just got to explain it to them better, and I'll talk about that in a second. I think what the legislature and the governor have done in Oklahoma is a great idea. Yes, you've been guilty of underfunding. Yes, your taxes are probably a little bit too low, but you're trying to make up for it. $4.3 billion in an 8-year plan for 1,150 projects, that's progress. That's trying to do something about a problem. And the governor deserves credit, as does the legislature, for putting that together. And yes, you don't want to have structurally deficient bridges. If we didn't repair bridges, and by the way, Pennsylvania, you ought to thank Pennsylvania, because if it wasn't for Pennsylvania, you'd be first in number of structurally deficient bridges. We're first. When I became governor, we led the nation by far. We had 6,600 structurally deficient bridges, exactly 1/10 of the 66,000 structurally deficient bridges in the nation. I put a $500 million capital program for bridge repair. Stimulus helped us mightily. By the time I left as governor, we were working on 1,400 bridges at the same time. And our unemployment rate was 7.4%. The national average when I left was 9.2%. We were by far the lowest of all of the big industrial states. No accident. We were investing in our infrastructure. We're now down to 5,400 structurally deficient bridges. Still a disaster, but we've carved over 17% of our deficit in about a 3-year program. So, what you guys have done, I think, is very admirable, and you need to keep it up, and you need to actually do more. It's interesting. The question was asked, how do we convince the public that we need to do these things? Well, I said to the mayor after he sat down, I said, he's got to be the most modest politician I've ever heard. He convinced the public time after time after time. But why was he successful? One, because he's a terrific politician and lays things out pretty clearly. But two, success breeds success. If the public sees a project and the project gets done and you know, pretty much on time, on budget, they say, hey, that's good. And there's that trust that was built, and one of the panelists talked about the trust, and then it's easier to do the second and the third. And it's interesting, public's much smarter than we are. In the last decade, every even-numbered year, there's national elections, either for the Congress or the presidency, and there are also tons of transportation referendums on the ballot, calling for more tolling, calling for increased taxes, calling for borrowing. In the last 10 years, they've been approved overwhelmingly. 79% in 1 year, 76%, 74%, 78% of the projects were voted yes. Even in 2010, arguably the most conservative anti-spending election of any of our lifetimes, 61% of transportation referendum initiatives were approved by the voters. Why do they do that and not want to pay for an increase in the gas tax? Easy. Because they can see the project. The voters of Charleston, South Carolina, the reddest of the red, improved 2 infrastructure projects that caused their sales tax to go up half a penny. One was for the port of Charleston. Well, they were smart enough to know that's where the jobs come from in Charleston. And they knew the port was lagging behind because it hadn't been revitalized. 2, the bridge that came from 95 into Charleston, the main bridge was crumbling and they needed to repair it. And they did it, they saw the value of them, and they'll do it again. Houston, Texas approved 2 transportation sales tax increases. It doesn't matter whether it's red or blue, people get it. And one thing we can do, leaders, business leaders, governmental leaders, we can talk to them, I think, about 2 things. One is the cost of inaction. We're always talking about what's the cost? What's it going to cost us if we do this infrastructure project? But we never tell the people what's it going to cost us if we don't. Panama Canal is being deepened so that these new tankers like we've never seen before, super tankers that need a 50-foot depth to be able to go into a port, carrying an incredible amount of throughput. they're going to be going through the Panama Canal next year. And there are 12 major Atlantic ports on the Atlantic seaboard. To be able to receive one of the supertankers, you're going to have to dredge to 50 feet. Only 2 of our 12 ports will be ready to receive them, which means that most of that tonnage will go to Canada, to Newfoundland, to Nova Scotia, to Halifax, places like that, because the Canadians have done it. They're ready. And what that means is we will not get tens of thousands of trucking jobs and tens of thousands of longshoreman jobs, which would have been added to each of those ports, including the Port of Philadelphia, had we done in advance and spent the money to do the dredging that we needed to do. We're not going to get those jobs, and those jobs are the last blue-collar, among the last blue-collar jobs that pay $60,000, $70,000, $75,000, $80,000, $85,000 a year. And we're going to lose them because we didn't invest in our infrastructure. It makes no sense. You know, taxpayer may have to pay, if we raise the gas tax, Mayor, in Oklahoma, the average driver would probably pay $110, $115 a year more. But the average driver in the United States pays $425 a year on an average in lost fuel, sitting in congestion, and in repairs to the car because of deficient roads. $425. We never talk about the cost of inaction. We never talk about the cost of lack of productivity because people don't get into work on time because of traffic. We never talk about the cost in transporting goods that goes up. According to the Urban Mobility Report, America loses $121 billion a year because our transportation system, our trucks, our cars, our whatever, sit in traffic and in congestion. We never compute, or if we do compute it, we never sell it to the public. And, you know, when I talk about the cost of inaction, people in the audience start nodding their heads and say, boy, you know, I never thought about that. I waste more gas than $110 a year by just idling. It's the cost of inaction. And the last thing that we should talk about, and then I'm going to conclude my remarks, well, I'm going to give you one charge, hopefully a charge to action. Last thing I want to talk about is another way to sell this. We've stopped taking risks. My book is called A Nation of Wusses, how America's leaders have lost the guts to continue to make us great. This country was built by risk takers. Think about it. The colonials, they were farmers and shopkeepers, and they dared to think that we could beat the greatest army and the greatest navy in the world at the time. We had no business winning. It was like Appalachian State beating Michigan. We had no business winning that war. And by the way, they knew what they were risking. Ben Franklin said we must all hang together or we're going to hang separately. John Hancock said he signed the Declaration so big so King George could see it and hang him first. And these were people who weren't desperate people. They were the landed gentry. Our Declaration is different than any other revolutionary document. It says we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Do you think anybody in the Russian Revolution had fortunes? In the French Revolution at the barricades had fortunes? These men risk took for an idea called liberty, an idea called independence. Every time this country needed to move in the right direction, we took risks. Jefferson signed a bill creating the Erie Canal. People told him it's too expensive, of course, and as an engineering feat, it can never be done. But he did it because he knew the nation needed it to open up commerce from the Midwest to the Atlantic seaboard, and the results were incredible. Abraham Lincoln, in the middle of the Civil War, decided that the nation needed a transatlantic east-west railroad system. They told Lincoln, you can't afford that in the time of war. And they also told him, you'll never get the train tracks over the Rockies. He did it. And the explosion in our economy in the years following the Civil War was dramatic. President Eisenhower decided that the country needed to be the best at moving goods and moving people swiftly. So he created an interstate highway system. And again, the critics said it's going to cost too much, we'll never afford it, it's, you know, we don't need it, etc. Well, he did it, and it became terrific. We built the Hoover Dam. We built so many different things because we weren't afraid. we've become a great country because we were willing to take risks, because we had the American spirit that said, we can do anything. JFK, when he said, after Sputnik went up, when he had a press conference and he promised that America would have a man on the moon before the end of the decade of the 60s, he said, my favorite line of all the great things that he said, of all the poetic lines he said, we do this not because it's easy, we do it because it's hard. We were a nation that did hard things, unafraid. We were a nation, one of the panelists said, we don't do big things anymore. We were a nation that did big things, unafraid. What we, the leaders, and I'm talking about business leaders as well as elected officials, what we have to say to people is we can do this. For decades, we had the best infrastructure in the world, and that's the reason we were the #1 economic power. We're getting our brains beat in by China, but not just by China, by Germany, by Spain, by all of these places. You know, if you've ever gone to Europe and taken a high-speed train, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. In Japan, they're going to, in the fall, institute a high-speed maglev train that goes 310 miles an hour. And you could drink a cup of tea without spilling a drop on it because it's maglev. It doesn't travel on the tracks. It travels above the tracks. It would, if we had it on the Eastern Seaboard, Philadelphia to New York City would be 24 minutes. What that would do for land values and investment in the city of Philadelphia would be absolutely incredible. Nobody would want to live in New York City and pay those prices anymore. They'd all live in Philadelphia. You could get from Washington, D.C. to BWI Airport in 6 minutes. In 6 minutes. But we don't want to do anything like that. It's too expensive. Oh, it's too hard. We can't get the right of way. Oh, what about the environmental impact statements? We used to do big, tough things. We're Americans, and I still believe the people of this country have in their hearts the willingness to do big things. They just want to hear what it's about. They just want to explain to them. And they want to be led. They want to be led. It's as simple as that. The mayor led. If those projects, if the first one of those projects blew up, mayor might not have gotten 88% of the vote in his last election, right? But he took the risk because he knew it was right. And that's what we need. We need risk takers. I don't mean foolhardy risk takers. We need prudent risk takers because we're Americans and we can do whatever we set our minds to. And the time has come to rebuild this country. And it starts with our water and wastewater systems. It starts with our roads. It starts with our bridges. It starts with levees. Levees in Oklahoma, D-. Do you know what happens when one of those levees breaks? That's what happened in Katrina. The Army Corps of Engineers had a request in for $700 million to rebuild the levees in New Orleans. There was no money. The levees broke. The federal government has spent $17 billion repairing New Orleans. It's time. Call your congressman. You've got in Jim Inhofe someone who, is, despite his conservative nature, is a true believer in infrastructure spending. I testified in front of Jim Inhofe when he was the ranking member of the Public Works Committee, and he said, Governor, after defense spending, the second most important thing we should be spending federal dollars on is infrastructure. Jim gets it, and if he gets it, there's a lot of other people in that building who get it. But they just need us to supply the courage. We can do it. It's a little bit like sending that permission slip into school. We need to give our representatives in Washington a permission slip. And although the panelists were all right about state and local governments stepping up and doing more, don't think for a minute that we can accomplish the goal that I sketched out without federal involvement. There are 66,000 structurally deficient bridges in America. It would take, in the next 10 years, it's going to take $76 billion to repair them, to make them safe, to make them viable. $76 billion. Anybody have any idea where that $76 billion is coming from? Not from Oklahoma City taxpayers, not from Oklahoma, the state of Oklahoma taxpayers. It has to come from a joint effort, and the federal government has to be involved. Simple as that. Can we do it? You bet we can. Will it take all of you banging the drum? Absolutely. There are people out there who are scared. They know we need to do this. If you took virtually any congressman out there, they know we have to do this. But they need to get a permission slip from Grover Nordquist. Do you realize that when the gas tax sunset, the Republican leadership, now they deny this, but it is true, the Republican leadership went to Grover Nordquist and said, Grover, if we vote to reinstate the gas tax at the same level, you won't count that as a tax increase, will you? And the reason they were worried about Grover is because more than half of the Congress signed a no-tax pledge to Grover Nordquist. Anybody here ever voted for Grover Nordquist? Anybody here have seen Grover Nordquist? He's like the Wizard of Oz. You pull back the curtain and there's no one there, and yet he's terrified of the United States Congress. So it's up to us. Can America be great again? Can we have the best infrastructure in the world? You bet we can. We just have to step up and do what Americans have always done. Be strong, be courageous, do hard and difficult things, and do them well. Thank you. We're out of time.
Thank you, Governor Rendell. We certainly appreciate you being here, and especially your inspirational remarks. Governor Rendell said to call your congressman. Well, your chamber is going to save you a telephone call. On August the 6th, our congressman, U.S. Congressman Cole, will be here at the chairman's event, so if you haven't registered, be sure and do that, and you can talk to him personally about these issues. Once again, I want to thank our signature sponsor, Cox Business, and all of the other sponsors that made this event possible. Thank all of you for your participation. We are adjourned.